good to go?
All right, and I'll retweet this. All right, dude, you have my undivided attention.
All right, well, we're live. So, Sven StarFury, welcome. It's great to be speaking with you.
Greetings, good to be here.
So, I'm a huge fan of your work, first and foremost. I love the memes that you put out. They're so useful in sending to normies and people that have either only just been orange pilled or haven't been orange pilled at all yet, because, you know, like all memes, it gets people to think, right? It gets people to ask these questions. You pose these hypotheticals to people, or you make these bold statements, fix the money, fix the world. And it gets people to think like, what the fuck does that mean? And so I love your work, and I'd love to just know why you started doing it, how you got into it, and maybe a bit of your Bitcoin rabbit hole story to get this thing kicked off.
Yeah, so you want me to start with how I got into Bitcoin?
Sure.
Yeah, so I guess I first heard about Bitcoin because I was a fan of actually your countryman, Stefan Molyneux, who had a Free Domain Radio, and he actually interviewed Andreas Antonopoulos. I think it was around 2014 or 15, so pretty early. And back then, I didn't actually have any financial means to even invest if I wanted to. So it was kind of always on my radar in that sense, but it wasn't until 2017 and another friend sort of really insisted I get into it. And since then, it's just been 100% Bitcoin. Like I was already so primed for it just because I was sort of on the libertarian path and understood this stuff about economics, and just anyway in my own life, like freedom's always been a huge thing for me. So yeah, that's how I got into it. And yeah, now it's just my total focus, really.
So how did you go from being kind of orange pilled with Bitcoin to, well, actually, what was it about what you mentioned kind of you always had a leaning towards freedom, or, you know, that was always an important kind of philosophical thing for you. But what was it about what Andreas and Stefan were talking about that day that kind of hooked you in? Like, what made you buy it and just not dismiss it as, well, this is, you know, this is stupid or can't work? Or
I think I got it straight away just because I'd been primed so much, even with like all the science fiction that I read as a teenager and all through my 20s. And actually, I did a podcast as well with Self-Banked, another prominent Bitcoin memer, and he kind of pulled on this thread quite a bit and made me realize that it's kind of my own origin story. I was actually born in East Germany, in East Berlin, and in 1985, my parents basically escaped East Germany to come to Australia, and they gave up literally everything. My dad, you know, had a house that he built by himself, you know, and just had to donate everything to the state basically to leave. And I think I always had this sense deep down, even before I could articulate it, that this freedom thing was really, really important. And then, you know, I guess it was sort of the mid 2005 or something, and then I found Steph, and he gave me the words to articulate this thing, you know, the libertarian ethos and, you know, also the economics behind it. So yeah, when it didn't take me long to see what Bitcoin was and the purpose of it. And after that, I was just totally on board, you know.
And what year again was that when you saw Andreas on Stefan's podcast or show? Can you hear me?
Sorry, you broke up a bit then.
Oh, sorry. What year was it when you saw Stefan or saw Andreas on Stefan's show?
I think it was like 2014 or 2015.
Okay.
So, like, I mean, that was like Steph was pretty early with that. I think it's a credit to him, and I'm sure some of his audience did pretty well because of that. So, yeah.
And so when you came across this and you saw what Bitcoin was, how did it change your perspective, your philosophy, and your behavior after that? Now, like, and I don't mean like all the different ways that you've changed since, but how did it kind of reorient yourself in terms of what you were striving towards and the tools you were using and that kind of stuff?
Yeah, so again, to reference the self-banked conversation, and I actually re-listened to it today, just sort of, I don't know, as a bit of a homework for this, but he was asking, you ask people, what's your red pill story? Or Bitcoiners say, what's your orange pill story? And I had to bring up in that as well, a lot of people are describing themselves as black pilled now, which kind of means you've kind of lost hope for society. And I must say, I was going down that path. Just it seemed really dark what's happening out in the world, and really it's like the orange pill is the antidote to the black pill. So this one thing that I posted to my Facebook to all my normie friends, and just commenting on the elections in the US now, and these two men vying for control of the most powerful nation on earth. They have a combined age of 150. Neither of them can touch type. They probably type with two fingers, let alone know how to code. And it's just like that the world, that Pax Americana, like this great empire, like these are the options being served up to its population. Like that could be pretty depressing, but I've got Bitcoin. I don't give a fuck. So, let the shit burn.
Yeah, man. I'm watching like pieces of these debates and stuff, and I'm just thinking like, oh my God, how horrible would I feel if Bitcoin wasn't around? Like I would just, what hope could you have if Bitcoin wasn't in existence? It would just be so fucking depressing to watch that shit.
Yeah, totally. And I mean, the stuff they talk about is just not relevant at all, but that's where the world, I think that thing's just got to play itself out, really.
Yeah. And so how did you get started with, the memes? Why did you decide that your kind of, at least initial contribution to all this stuff was going to be helping to, communicate this message through the virality of these memes that you've been making?
Yeah. So I can go back a bit because it's kind of a cool story. In like 2016, me and a mate of mine, we actually started a YouTube channel. Again, this is thanks to Steph as well that I met this guy. We were both on one of Steph's call-in shows as a caller, and had this super long conversation with him. And every now and then, I remember I used to listen to the call-in shows, and you'd get someone who had an Australian accent. I think like, oh, that's cool. There's other Aussies that listen to him. And this dude, he happened to drop some clues that he was a musician and that he lived sort of on the East Coast. And I just actually did some Googling, and I found this guy and got in touch with him, and I said, like, look, we both seem to listen to Steph. And anyway, a friendship formed, and a little while after that, we both started this YouTube channel together, just to talk about freedom stuff and philosophy and whatever. And then a few months after that, we got invited down to Sydney to participate in the Milton Friedman conference, which is a libertarian conference down there, to talk on the alt media panel, which was like a spin out because we've been doing it for just a few months and had a few hundred subscribers or whatever. And so in preparation for that, I decided I wanted to make some bumper stickers. I was going to make a taxation is theft bumper stickers. And if you're going to design something like that and get them printed, you may as well do a bunch of designs. And so I just had this range of stickers, and I called them truth tags. They were weapons of mass instruction. And yeah, so I sold a couple of hundred of these stickers down in Sydney and paid for my flight down there, and that was cool. And it was just my sort of side hobby project that I had in the last few years. And then I got to Twitter, and it's this whole sort of gamified thing, and you're trying to hone these 288 character messages and get some point across, and get your likes or whatever, and get your followers, and that medium is really constrictive. And I realized that that GIFs, that animations, they were sort of like a way to hack Twitter. So you could, if a picture is worth 1,000 words, like how many words is an animation worth? And so yeah, it's just a sort of back channel to get into people's consciousness. And we've got these primate monkey brains, so anything that's shiny and moving we're attracted to. So yeah, and I guess I've used this sort of software for most of my adult life and as a teenager as well. And it was only at the start of this year that I just started learning After Effects, the specific software that I use for motion graphics and animation. And I've just got a really potent muse in Bitcoin. So yeah.
And so you mentioned you've been familiar with kind of the software and stuff. Like in your normie life, are you in the design field of any kind?
Not really. Before this year, my partner and I, we ran a little organic food business, and we were doing the farmers markets every Sunday, and it was really just us. Like we started it with nothing, and so I did all the labels myself, and so started learning Illustrator and all that. And I've just been a wannabe hacker kid since my early teenage years. So I've always just used software, and like I struggle actually considering myself an artist. It's more like I just like using these tools, and it's got more to do with like engineering the animation stuff anyway. So yeah.
I want to go back to your parents' story for a second. So you said they left East Germany in 1985 without being able to take anything with them, I'm assuming, in terms of wealth?
Yeah, it was basically like 2 suitcases worth of clothes, and my dad managed to smuggle a few $100s worth of US dollars under his watch face, actually. And the reason he had access to US dollars, this is a kind of funny story, but his business in East Germany at the time, because we lived in East Berlin, and he owned and managed the toilets at the airport, which sounds kind of weird, but that meant that there were Westerners coming to the airport, and they would tip with Western money, so $1 back then. So anyway, but that was pretty much it. And his property, and where he built his house, that was adjoining his father's property, my granddad. And it's the story of his life, tragically, that 3 years later the wall came down, and that property, just the property alone was worth tons. And but he started here from zero again in his late 30s with two kids. So yeah.
Sure. And how did he get a foothold in Australia? You hear me?
No, you were silent for a bit then.
Okay. I was just saying, how did he get reestablished in Australia?
Hard work, like they bought a sandwich bar. Well, firstly, he had a brother here that came out in the 60s before that. And, it sort of got him started in his first job. And as a kid, I just remember they always bought an old shitty house, and Dad renovated it and did it up. And like I said, they had a little sandwich bar and just worked 7 days, and yeah, they just worked. Like that's how you get anything done, really. Don't think he really ever asked for handouts. So yeah, like major respect to him for doing that. And now they're comfortable enough. But fuck, man, like starting from zero again in your late 30s, it's pretty much sort of the age that I am now. I couldn't imagine that. I've got a 5-year-old daughter as well. He came over here with a 4-year-old me and my sister, who was 1 year old at the time. So like I said, that's the story of his life, and he'll probably have regrets about that for the rest of his life. But me and my sister and my mum were like, thank you so much. You chose freedom over everything else, and we're grateful. Like I'm certainly glad I'm in Australia right now and not in Europe. So
yeah. And that's we talk about citadels, and if things get bad, where we'll go, where is the bastion of freedom in the world today, effectively. And the story has happened so many times before, where people were in really difficult, shitty situation, where they were being oppressed, where they were subject to authoritarianism, little opportunity and all that kind of stuff. And so many people just decided, like, it won't get that bad, or it's not so bad, and we'll just stick around and wait and see. And other people just pulled the trigger, made that, I'm sure, super hard decision to say, no, this isn't how I want to live. This isn't the circumstance, an environment in which I want to raise a family. So I'm going to somewhere where we can at least have freedom, even if it means we have to start over again. You got to respect that attitude.
Mm-hmm. Thanks, Dad, if you're watching this. But it's really it's our privilege as Westerners. You know, we live in stable Western democracies, and it's part of the disconnect, like part of the reason that people just don't get Bitcoin, because you know, for them the money's been stable, their society has been stable. Like, they don't understand the reality of something like, you know, hyperinflation actually happening. But you know, that happened to my grandparents. So yeah, like, people just need to learn a bit more about history to understand that that sort of thing is possible. And I remember hearing recently an interview with a VJ, and he had a sort of similar story, because apparently like, his dad was going back to India with all this gold sort of thing, and it was that same thing, which I didn't connect with until recently. But I mean, it's kind of in my DNA, this thing. Like, if Bitcoin was around when my dad was trying to flee East Germany, he could have taken all his hard-earned wealth with him, you know. So I guess I've just been sort of primed with it from that respect. But yeah, I didn't realize it consciously until recently.
Yeah. Do your parents know about Bitcoin? And if so, interested, hodlers?
Yeah, well, I mean, I don't shut up about it. So well, certainly I didn't in 2017. So yeah, I mean, they know about it, and, you know, they've kind of dipped their toes in. And I mean, that's the other thing. My whole life, my dad's been going on about the central banks and how it's all bullshit, and, you know, really, getting me to distrust the governments. So, you know, I wish they'd buy more. Sorry.
Even in Australia, he has that same, like, even though he extricated himself and his family to this, you know, much freer environment, he's still critical of that system.
Yeah, I think he's just skeptical of the whole enterprise. Like, he probably wouldn't label himself as such, but I think the way he lives his life, he's a pretty hardcore anarchist. Maybe even, like, I don't know if he'd agree with me saying that, but yeah, I think so.
And so, I mean, I gotta think someone like that would be really into Bitcoin. What you kind of gave a sense that, like, they're dipping their toes, but they're not kind of hook, line, and sinker. What's the stumbling block for someone like that to not really buy into this?
I think it's just a generational thing, man. Like, it's too hard to get. Like, I mean, he's in his 70s, you know, and I've got him onto Facebook recently, and it's just a whole other language that you have to learn how to speak, you know. So, you know, they say the same thing about science, you know, like, there's no progress made in science until the old professors and stuff die off, and, like, I think it's just going to be that way in this as well. But, you know, that's his own things. He has a hard time committing to things. Like, I think he got burned a bit with that decision to move to Australia, and the wall coming down subsequently. Like I said, he's always regretted it, and maybe makes it hard for him to make big decisions like that since then. Not to psychoanalyze him too much here, but yeah.
And what about you? So you've been you've been kind of nomad living for a while now. Why don't you tell me about the motivation and kind of experience of that? Yeah,
I've been playing up the whole #van life thing on my on Twitter for a bit now, but astute watchers will see that I'm actually in a house now. So we just moved in on the weekend, and it's fucking awesome to have a place again. We're really, like, I've joked, like, we're appreciating the fuck out of this thing. But yeah, the last 15 months we were living in a camper van, and that's because last year we sold that little business that I mentioned. And since then we were just traveling around Australia, and, like, someone's smiling down on us because, like, it was a hell of a timing to sell that business before, you know, everything that's transpired in 2020 with the virus and everything else. So yeah, good time to be mobile like that. And like I said, it's just the freedom, man. Like, it all comes back to that. I think we totally maximized freedom, and we've got a, you know, nearly 6-year-old daughter now, and again, maximized our time with her. I think the first years of life are so important. So yeah, we just did everything we can to be with her as much as possible. And my partner was starting her work. We're actually touring around Australia with her parenting workshops. So yeah, that was it. And like I said, we managed to sell that business, which we started from zero. So had some savings, and this last year was just getting her business off the ground, and now that's running, and she does therapy sessions one-on-one, and we've been able to do the digital nomad thing, and my dad during the day, and then at night I contribute to the meme war, I guess, and help Bitcoin.
What's it like raising a young kid in a camper van?
Oh, it's awesome, man. Like they don't need anything but our love and attention, So yeah, like everything was new. We did like nearly 10,000 Ks in that 12 months. The last 6 months I was living at a friend's property up here in sort of in rural, up in the hills, and it's just beautiful. We're growing avocados and tea, and had the chickens, and it's real farm life for her. And so I think she's had a real appreciation where things actually come from. I really despair for some of the kids today, and they think that food comes from a supermarket and have no real understanding where, like, the value of things and how hard it is to get something done. And even prior to that, the 5 years that we ran our organic food business, and like I said, we were at the farmers markets every Sunday, and she was there with us from the age of like 6 months onwards, and helping with the money box and stuff towards the end of it. So yeah, it's been great. I love parenthood. I wish I'd started sooner. There's a lot of propaganda that kind of puts down parenting, but I think it's the best thing for a young man.
You plan on having more?
Sorry?
Do you plan on having more?
Oh man, I'd love to have like just a ton of kids, and I get a real funny feeling of like regret or remorse when I see big families. There's a dad there and he's got like 4 or 5 kids in tow, and I'm like, fuck, that could have been me, but it might not work out for that just because of how things went with the first pregnancy and my partner. Right. But yeah, it is what it is. I think I'm just so blessed that we have one beautiful daughter, and I highly, highly recommend it. It's the most low time preference thing a human can possibly do, is to have kids, I believe.
That's awesome, man. And how do you guys feel about being stationary now? Or what was the reason behind that decision, and how do you feel about now that you made it?
We just done it. Like we'd really done it. We did the van life thing, and really it's just so we can be more productive. Like my partner has a lot to offer the world as well. We say in Bitcoin, fix the money, fix the world. I actually like to add to that, fix the money and fix parenting, and you fix the world. And she's a sort of parenting coach and trauma therapist. So, and I'm a Bitcoiner, so I feel like we've got the 2 most important things, boxes ticked in that regard. And it's just, you are limited by what you can do in the van, just by how much work you can do. But now she has an office and I have my space, and we can double our input, so twice as many animations and twice as much of her work as well. So I think it's better for the world that we have a house.
That's awesome. How have you guys changed? A lot is made, and I love this topic of talking about how people have changed internally and how the behavior has changed as a result of being involved in Bitcoin, right? Has that been the case for you? And if so, what have they been?
I don't think it's changed so much, because I think I was always searching for something like that. And before Bitcoin, it was sort of like just, libertarian ideals that I was trying to spread. And, I've always had like maybe grandiose dreams of, just that you can change the world through ideas and stuff. So like I was ready when Bitcoin fell on my lap again in 2017. I'm like, yeah, this is the thing. And so I think what's changed for me is just that I have a purpose and somewhere to direct the energy to. Like otherwise I'd still be playing with this software and just dicking around, but wouldn't have anything to actually create. So yeah, I think just like the purpose thing is really important, and actually like working on something that has a legitimate hope of actually changing things for the better. I think there's so much stuff out there which is just sort of like, maybe you'd call it like activism theater, and the things that are people putting so much energy to, it's not actually going to help the world in any meaningful way. So yeah.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more with that. I mean, it's just amazing to now have it's so worthy of your energy because of how valid a solution it represents. And that just means that like it just pulls the energy out of you. Like it's so easy to contribute your time and attention to this thing because it's so worthwhile. Like nothing, other than maybe parenting, for example, it seems like nothing is more worthwhile. And so how could you not, want to spend more time contributing to something like that?
Yeah, I mean, you hear that story so often, and even since 2017, when I was coming into it, just like the number of Bitcoin podcasts and, just the amount of activity I've seen on Twitter since then, it really does seem growing. It's always hard to tell because we're sort of in the echo chamber, I guess. But yeah, like you said, and it's because the stakes are so high, like it's easy to work on this. So yeah, I totally agree, man.
Yeah. I think we've exchanged a few Twitter messages about. You said you had some psychedelic stories, or a unique take on psychedelics, and of course, this is a topic that I'm very interested in as well. This was kind of my Bitcoin before Bitcoin, I guess you could call it. So what's your take?
Yeah, so it was actually only this year that I cut my dreads off. So kind of thinning on top anyway. I couldn't keep that up for much longer anyway. But yeah, I was the full on hippie dude and loved my mushrooms. And actually, like that's a nice way to describe it. Like the psychedelics were your Bitcoin before Bitcoin. And yeah, I did consider myself like a psychedelic warrior and loved my Terence McKenna and told everyone you got to listen to this stuff and whatever. And there's real value to that too. But again, it's like these things that I've done and really thoroughly done. So it's like, I kind of hung my hat up in that regard. And, since my daughter was born, there's been none of that really. But like I do tell people, and it's a Terence McKenna quote, I believe, it's just such a shame if you go from cradle to the grave without having a psychedelic experience. It's like as much of your human birthright as the sexual experience or anything like that. And it may well be like I do see a fair overlap in amongst Bitcoiners and people who are switched on in a psychedelic fashion, I guess. And I think maybe it primes you in the sense just to question things, and just any psychedelic experience kind of forces you to recognize that your experience is so subjective and it can be radically altered. And, you can come back to reality after that. But yeah, like that experience is malleable in that sense. So hopefully you go out into the real world and realize like the assumed truths of the world, might not be so true either. Yeah.
Psychedelics are such a beneficial tool in many ways, but they're pretty much exclusively in the internal realm. Now that can be kind of transmuted to the external world by the change that happens internally and that you then express into the world. And that was always kind of my, that was my perspective on how psychedelics could, how they could change things the most is you have to be a representative of, the knowledge, the wisdom, the insights, the things that you learn in that realm and put it out there in the world. And I mean, that's just always the case for the type of world you want to see, right? You want to quote unquote be the change, and very cliche, but I don't think there's any disputing that. But Bitcoin just came along and represented a tool for the exterior world that had the potential to have equal or even greater impact on, an improvement and facilitation of, umbrella term good in the world. And that's why it was so exciting and of course it was easier to hijack people too. I could corner you at a social event or a party and go on about psychedelics and the merits and the history and all this kind of stuff. But at the end of the day, if you're not into it, you're not into it. But everybody loves money, everybody wants more money. So that makes it a lot easier to, hijack people's, I guess, lower brain and get them to, pay attention to number go up. And then once they do that, then oftentimes they get all the other stuff eventually.
Something that I'd never thought about when, if you're comparing Bitcoiners and the psychedelic thing, like what do they have in common? And to go meta from there, it's kind of like a thing about truth. Like they often say that about, psychedelics, like, is that a deeper or truer reality? Like, what is it that we're actually tapping into, and, I had it with my truth tags. Like, truth has always been this huge thing. And I don't know if it was Plato or Socrates, but that thing about the true, the good, and the beautiful, like, they're all kind of wrapped up in one. And, one way of looking at Bitcoin is that it's a truth machine that we can all share and have like this decentralized proof. And it's just absolute objectivity in that thing. So, in the same sense, like, in the psychedelics is sort of a seeking for truth. And so, yeah, like somehow they're kind of connected in that sense.
Oh, absolutely. I think there's actually a ton of overlap, which I'm sure I'll continue and many other people will continue to explore further. But just to that point, I think that's one of the reasons why we look at, I'm getting a bit of feedback now on your audio. You don't have a headset, do you? Or earbuds or something?
Yeah, I do.
Can you hear me?
Check.
You got me?
I got you.
Yeah. So that's one of the interesting reasons. And I know, the kind of like, is Bitcoin a religion? And maybe that's the wrong framing, but that sort of thing is a fairly contentious topic for some. But I think that, the question is just asking, like, what is the nature of people's relationship with Bitcoin? Because religion kind of is all about what is the nature of people's relationship with the unknown, the supernatural, the deeply personal, the spiritual, all these different things. And, when you have, as you say, a truth machine, something that just, basically just chugs along and verifies truth, and which, nobody can change that truth. I think truth is a fundamental concept to all religions. And so that's probably why there's these connotations with Bitcoin, is because, it's right there in front of you, and when you're confronted with truth in such an obvious way, I think maybe that's just the nature of truth, that it instills, has that effect on us, especially and truth is unchanging too, and that's represented in Bitcoin. So when, I often think of it in terms of, and whether it's in the psychedelic realm, in Bitcoin, like when you stumble upon a truth, and if you really believe in it, or if it really is a truth, then the only thing that can change is you. The truth doesn't change, right? And that's why it's so transformative, because, you've stumbled on an unchanging, immutable truth. And in order to behold it, integrate it, it just has this kind of, transformative aspect that, you are the one that has to kind of align with it, not vice versa. And that's why I think it has such a transformative effect on people. And I think that's part of the phenomenon we're seeing unfolding with Bitcoin.
Yep. I hadn't thought of this before, but it's like Bitcoin fills the God-shaped hole that so many of us have in our hearts. And like in the early 2000s, again, when YouTube sort of first came on the scene, and I was right into like the Richard Dawkins and the Christopher Hitchens, all the sort of atheist debaters and stuff like that. And that used to be, before Bitcoin and before psychedelics and before libertarianism and all that. That was sort of my crusade, I guess. And the funny thing is, this guy that I mentioned that I started the YouTube channel with, we were both sort of from that ilk, I guess. And then a couple of years into me knowing him, he found Jesus, and now he's like this based Christian dude who's got, his YouTube channel, he's got like 10,000 plus followers, and he's a musician too. He just made this Christian inspired album. And that kind of happened after Jordan Peterson came on the scene, and Peterson was here in Australia, and we went to his events and stuff like that. So that was I'm an atheist personally, but that was a fascinating transformation to watch in my friend. And whatever you believe in that respect, one thing's for sure is that it's been fantastic for him personally, and his family life. So, and I think it comes back to that thing about having a purpose. Something that's higher than yourself. And it doesn't really matter what it is, but I think I forget who said that now, but give a man a why and he can bear almost any how, you know. And so we have this why of like, why Bitcoin? It's to separate money and state, you know, it's to bring freedom to the world. And, you know, it's like what I say to people when I'm working for Bitcoin, it doesn't feel like work. You know, I've heard that echoed by some people, but, you know, I can spend hours dicking around in these software and, you know, making the animations and whatever. And it's just, you know, you've got this drive to do it because it's something greater than yourself.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more with that. And, you know, it's fun. And I think so many of our trajectories were similar. You know, like when I first, I guess, you know, started learning about how the world works as much as possible, you know, you end up, or one of the roads you go down, it's like, oh my God, you know, these institutions of religion are such a suppressant on the world. They're such a, you know, almost a cancer on the world, right? Like, first of all, how could people believe this shit? And second of all, look at all the horrible things that have been done in the name of these gods or these institutions, etc. And so, you know, I read Dawkins and Harris and all the rest of it. And then you keep going, and maybe you wind up in the psychedelic realm. You think, oh no, maybe they're like, maybe it's not a formal religious, you know, dogmatic religious thing, but maybe there's something else. It seems like there's something else going on at the very least. And then you keep going and you keep going. A lot of people came to Bitcoin through that road, whether they, you know, in my case, trying to buy drugs on the Silk Road and realizing that you needed Bitcoin to do so, or, you know, by some other means. And, you know, or as you say, Peterson, you know, and I had a conversation recently with a few Bitcoiners about this very subject. And to me, it's, I mean, if your friend has improved his life as a result of, you know, quote unquote, finding Jesus, then, you know, more power to him. That's because the proof is in the pudding, right? I mean, I say the proof is in the pudding, and I genuinely mean that. But from my perspective, I don't care about the pudding if the proof is not truth, I guess is the way to put it. Like, I need my orienting belief to be, I need to believe that it is as truthful as possible. If I'm gonna be okay with how it orients my behavior and my life. And that's why I don't, you know, ascribe to the dogmatic religions in the way that they're usually espoused in terms of, you know, the hierarchy of gods and a lot of the dogma. But I think it's really useful to explore these stories and this wisdom to try to see, one, where they come from, and two, if there's any deeper truths in them beyond the institutions that have kind of you know, carried them forward over the last several hundred or several thousand years. Like, for me, it's a pretty simple thing to do away with the institution, right? The institution is fallible, but is there anything in these stories and in this wisdom that is worthwhile to explore and maybe even integrate and adopt? And I think that's why Peterson's work has been so interesting, because, you know, whatever his actual religious beliefs are, he always kind of swerves on that question, but you know, his exploration of where these stories came from, I think, is rooted in a far more fundamental and foundational truth in human psychology and evolution than just a couple of stories made up so that people could explain the natural world and, you know, develop some kind of order in it. Like, I think he's made it pretty clear that it's far deeper than that. And in an exploration of those stories, I think you find truths that are very interesting. Not to say that if you find them, it means you adopt that faith. I don't think that's necessary. But I think it's beneficial not to do away with all of these things just because they've been corrupted by institutions, but to say, you know, and the same could be true for Buddhism, for Islam, for, you know, Taoism, for Hinduism. You know, all of these things, I guess, unfortunately, have had institutions grow up around them, and the institutions become fallible, corrupt, etc. But there's so much interesting, the genesis of all of these ideas and all of these stories and thoughts, I think, is rooted in something far more fundamental within us. And if we can understand what that is, then I think that becomes a far more valid orienting truth for how we live our lives.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, I used to self-describe as like a militant anti-theist, you know. It was like just in my early 20s or as a late teenage years. And I went to a private school, and it was sort of like a Catholic school, and like the religious education there was really rammed down your throat. And that, I mean, that just completely rubbed me the wrong way, you know. And so just as a matter of delivery, like anything that was delivered in that way, you know, by these authority figures that style themselves to be like infallible, and just when you see how truly fallible they actually are, and that, you know, like all authority was just out the window for me after that. And so like I went hard in the anti-religious direction, and that's really just such a, you know, sort of first surface level thinking about it. And it's, you know, it's just the nature of the education system that that they can drive the wonder out of even something like that. It's supposed to be the most profound thing, like this idea of religion. But you know, as with all things in education, like I love learning. I love reading. You know, that's all I ever did. And you know, as a teenager, like all my sci-fi novels and whatever else. But somehow, like, you know, 12 years of education, and they destroyed my love of learning. And, you know, by the time I got out of high school, I fucking hated it, you know. And, you know, that's what kids just, they want to learn, and they want to be sponges for information. So, you know, it's a testament to how fucked the education system is that they can drive that out of people. But so yeah, and you come back around, and it might have something to do with like Dunbar's number, you know, like 150 people. That's all that we can sort of get in our heads, and that's social systems don't really scale beyond that. And when we do try and scale them beyond that, like we get these things about building these institutions. And like you say, it's the institutions that are fallible. Like once you get bureaucracy creeping into things, like the actual essence of the thing is so lost. So like I said, this idea of like the God-shaped hole in people's hearts, and people fill it with all sorts of shit, you know, like you could, you know, it's been argued that social justice is another religion, you know, and people just, they have to search for something larger than themselves, like whatever it is, like some cause, or they need to feel that they have some purpose, you know. So that's always going to be like that. And hopefully we can find something and help people understand that you know, Bitcoin is this higher purpose, and it actually has a chance of actually affecting a real change.
Yeah, I think it's probably safe to say that we're all guided by some belief, right? I mean, all of our actions have some motive, and I think, you know, maybe part of the definition of belief is like it's the thing that most guides or inspires or incentivizes your behavior. And so we're, like you said, whether you call it a God-shaped hole or you know, internal compass or whatever, like we all need something in there that we believe in strongly enough that, you know, causes us to make decisions one way or the other, that guides our behavior. And I guess it can be filled with a great many things. But I think that's why it's so important to constantly refine what that thing is, so that, because that's the real, I guess, spiritual journey, is continuing to refine what the belief is that orients and it motivates your behavior. You know, because if the more truthful that thing is, the more pure that thing is, then the more pure and aligned and truthful and righteous and good your behavior will be. You know, so that's why the quest to continue to understand that thing and refine it within you, so that guiding impetus is as pure and true as it can be, is such an important thing. Mm-hmm. And that's why, you know, that's in my life, that's why learning has always been a big thing. The psychedelic exploring has always been a big thing. Learning about Bitcoin, learning about different philosophies, because the importance of that search and how you integrate what you find on it is, you know, that's maybe the purpose of life. That's the spiritual path, you know, to really use some loaded language in the cliche term. But I think that's kind of unavoidable. And what's interesting about Bitcoin so much is that, you know, a true awakening, I think, is happening. And yeah, we're in our echo chamber and we're a bunch of zealots right now. But look at like you mentioned before, all this content that's being created, memes, podcasts, books, articles, all of this stuff is creating more zealots. And I don't think in a forceful way, but like, I think people that come into space now, all these resources, I mean, look at the Michael Saylors of the world, right? They come in earlier this year And because of such a dearth of resources and great, people that have put together really thought-provoking explorations of this subject matter, people can come into it. And if they come into it with an open mind, they say, holy shit, this is really legit. And it changes them fundamentally very quickly. You can, your whole worldview can be changed as a result of getting involved in this thing. And the reason why I think an awakening is happening is because when you see, on the one hand, something that's so nakedly truthful, right? That you can see exactly what it is, and there's no facade, there's no, it's again, like we said before, it's a form of truth. Then you compare everything else you see to that form of truth, and everything else in comparison and relative to that looks overly complex, or looks suspect, or looks, you can see the untruth or the unnecessary aspects of things, and you wonder, why are they like that? And if you dig, well, maybe corruption, maybe co-option, maybe inefficiency. Like the kind of, it's a mirror, right? Truth is a mirror, and Bitcoin is a mirror to all other things, and that's why I think we see this awakening in so many different domains as a result of people getting involved in Bitcoin, because it shines the light of truth on all of them, and it forces people to say, why is that way? Why can't that thing be as simple as this thing? And, so I think there's a genuine awakening, and it's being represented in behavior change, and people orienting themselves differently, spending their time and energy and attention on things differently. And it's so fucking exciting to be a part of it, and to see it, and to talk to people about it, man. It's like, it's unbelievable.
Yeah, word, brother. Like, there's nothing like talking to other Bitcoiners that get it, and quite envious of you. I know you just do this podcast for an excuse to talk to more Bitcoiners. Definitely missing in my personal life. Can't wait to get to like a meetup or something again, and just to be in a room full of people that get it. But yeah, the thing about truth, it's just the most efficient way. And one definition of truth that I like is just conformity to reality. And reality is that which, when you stop believing it, does not go away. That's a quote from Philip K. Dick. And the thing about Bitcoin is it's sort of internally consistent as well. So it's just like, it's sort of the most efficient way. And like you said, once you see something that's self-contained and just sort of true from all directions, and you go back into the real world and you see what's going on there, it's just so obvious. And to draw this back to, what I do as well with the memes, and it's about communication, and this ties into the psychedelic thing, and all my drug use, and okay, I'm tying a bunch of things together now, but like, even back in the day when I was, and before the psychedelics, I was a raver kid, so all these dodgy warehouse parties in more of a city warehouse setting or something like that, rather than out in nature with the psychedelics. But even back then, and I'm very grateful, because one of our friends back then, he was totally straight edge, never did any drugs, but just fucking loved the music, loved to dance, and he'd go hard as. And it sort of made me realize not to take it for granted, and also to treat it with some kind of reverence. Just don't do them just to get off your head, but try and take something back. Like especially on something like MDMA, and it's like you love everyone and everything, and there's such profound feelings and like peak feelings, and I'm like, I want to take some of this back to reality. So I always had that sort of mindset going into it. And then later on with the psychedelics as well, I mean, they're harrowing experiences, right? Like, you get right to the edge. And I was always like, well, if I'm going to do this thing, like, just really pay attention and try to bring something back, so that's more of that truth thing. I lost one of my tangents then, so I kind of lost the thread of things. But
it's so hard in the psychedelic realm to bring things back, though. It got to the point for me. It's almost like because whether, I don't think memory is operable in that realm, or at least it's a really kind of it kind of slips through your fingers, sort of like dreams, I guess. You come back and you just can't. Your perspective is different. So I think it's almost like the memories aren't accessible, because you're now in a different point of perspective, and they can't reach that perspective. So
sure,
I got to the point where I would just do my best to be so open to being imprinted upon in the experience. And I kind of just allowed, like, my faith in the experience was that if I fully engage in the experience and go as, let it happen as far and as deep and as intense as possible, that I'd be imprinted with something, I'd be imprinted with the nature of that experience or the nature of that energy, whatever we call that, what's happening, and that would be expressed through me as a result of having the experience. And I wouldn't have to consciously think like, oh, that insight is now going to form the basis of my thinking on this, and I'm going to change my behavior. I just kind of like had faith that the power of that experience, I guess, would transform me. And I was just going to kind of allow that process to happen.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and for me it was quite similar because after doing it a few times, you realize, well, you're not getting the details back, but
Yeah.
you can really kind of tune into, like, for want of a better word, like the vibe of it all. And somehow when you get back to reality, you got to try and reverse engineer that feeling into what may have actually happened. And but I remember the other thing, because one of those tangents was communication. So like, back in the warehouse party days, that'd be Friday or Saturday night or whatever. And then, when the party ended and everyone had to go home, we'd go to someone else's place and the party would continue. Like, the drugs would usually continue, and they called them recovery parties, but there usually wasn't much recovering going on. It was just like charging on. And so, a bunch of trippers and super high people sitting around in a room, they've just been, dancing, in the dark with lasers for the last 12 hours. But, and then what can you do? You chat, And so I always had this idea about communication, and I did some of NLP, neuro-linguistic programming, back in the day, and you kind of learn about, communication and what's possible. And there's really a kind of magic about it, because, I can say some words and, you're on the other side of the planet, and I can make you feel something. I can change something within you somehow. And you kind of get to this idea, like, well, how far can you take that thing? Like, how effectively can you communicate something? And then, you get to this idea of, like, in NLP, they tell you, like, the actual words, the content are maybe 7% of what you're saying. Then the tonality is like, 35% or whatever. But the main part of it is this nonverbal communication, just like, is it a raised eyebrow or, just something like that. And to tie it back in with what I do now with my animations, it's like, how much knowledge and, how much of the essence of these ideas can I squeeze into a couple of seconds worth of dancing pixels and convey some essential truth to someone through that, like, totally abstracted all the words and stuff away and just, like, sort of pure, like, telepathy somehow, like that. So that's sort of what I'm trying to do, I guess.
Yeah, it's fucking bananas that's even possible. But because what you do, like, and I love how you framed it like that, but just how little can you use to convey or express or communicate something, right? And that's why art is so important, and that's why I think memes have become such a big part of this movement, is because, you can talk for hours and hours about philosophy and economics and politics and history. And it just, for someone like me, I'm very, very interested in that. But nothing lands. That's why the quotes escape me right now, but something about, like, the role of art in revolution. Because, nothing really strikes like art. Art speaks to a deeper part of our brain, or the soul, or whatever you want to call it. And if it strikes the right chord, it can be, again, transformative. I mean, maybe if it expresses truth in a certain way, maybe it can be transformative. And it's so fascinating that so little is required for that to be the case. Like, maybe we get to the point where an image is all that's required for someone to, to be transformed by some form of truth. I mean, right now, that's, fix the money, fix the world. It's however many pixels on a GIF, right? And maybe, that's very little text, but it's enough to get someone's mind thinking in a way far more than a 3-hour podcast about Austrian economics, and how could that be whittled down to, one word or one image? I mean, it's amazing that we're wired that way, to take that input that is kind of this subjective, non-specific expression or form of communication, and allow it to go so deeply within us that it fundamentally changes our perspective or our behavior. I mean, I always, I always think to myself, like, more art. Like, it would be great to see even more art in this space of all kinds, right? Memeing, graphic novels, paintings, everything. Everything is art, really. I guess that's the punchline.
Yeah, well, it depends on your definition. But I think I assume you're about my age. I'm 40 soon, and I think we're born at a really sort of special time. Like, we might be, maybe every generation feels this way. They kind of call it millennial thinking. Like, you're the generation that's just on the edge of the special thing. But I think there really is something that happened, in the 90s. That's when the information age really was born, and I still remember the time before that, like my first computer, like, I was on BBSs before there was such a thing as an internet. Like, kids alive today, they'll never know a time without smartphones and internet and instantaneous access to the sum total of the world's knowledge and information. Like, it's so fucking wild, and we take it so for granted. And, one of many things that's come as a result of this is this whole new sort of language of communication on the internet, which is like memes, which they are able to squeeze and concentrate so much information in just an image, and it transcends language as well. Like, it's really fully blown, and it ties kind of back into Richard Dawkins. Like, I remember reading The Selfish Gene, where that word meme was sort of first kind of used. Like, he invented that word, and that kind of speaks to how rapidly language evolves anyway. Like, he invented that word, but now the word meme means, like, picture with some words or something like that. It's just, it's wild how fast things are moving now. So yeah, I feel really fortunate to be a part of it, I guess.
Yeah. It is crazy that the time we're in, as you say, like, maybe because every generation is always on the cusp of history. Now, I know there's been periods where, the quote unquote dark ages, where maybe things have seemed like they were actually degrading, or things weren't advancing, like innovation wasn't advancing. But I think throughout most of history, you probably had that sense, because you had all previous innovation plus whatever was happening in the current moment. But it does seem like right now we're in this, accelerated period where at least the form of innovation is so foreign to what came previously that, it's one, difficult to really appreciate or grapple with or understand what the implications are going to be. And two, just to kind of to keep up and understand how to engage in this thing. But what I find so fascinating about Bitcoin is that even though it's born out of this digital realm, and it's exclusively digital, mainly, but it's kind of harkening back, or at least it's inspiring a harkening back in a lot of the people that use it to a more simplified, and even in some cases a more traditional way of life. And I'm wondering why you think that might be the case, if you agree with it at all. But I've spoken with enough people now that, I won't generalize for everybody, but a lot of people, less material goods, less things cluttering up their life, only really genuine and strong relationships, nuclear family, cleaner approach to diet and approach to health in general, that kind of stuff. Like, why do you think, nestled within this tremendous technological revolution that encompasses not only Bitcoin, but the internet and, AI and everything that's happening, do we have the people that are kind of at the bottom of the adoption curve? So like the earlier adopters of this radically new technology are being inspired toward, and like going back in other areas of their life to a more traditional existence.
Yep. I think the reason is the industrial age is over, and we're moving into the information age. And it's that William Gibson quote, like the future is already here. It's just not evenly distributed, But I like, especially this year with all the stuff with the pandemics, and it seems to me that big cities have kind of run their course. Like if this is the new normal now, and everyone's remote working, or so many people can remote work, like why do we need to all be crammed in these big cities? And I mean, you say it's going back. I mean, it's really just that people don't want all this bullshit consumer stuff and the big TV and whatever else, and they kind of realize what's really important. Like, at least that's my hope. And again, it's always so hard to tell. Again, because we're all in these echo chambers, whether it's your social media feed, it's all algorithmically driven. I fundamentally have no idea what, the average person is into. Like all I see is, Bitcoin content, and like I don't ever go on my Facebook feed. I don't watch TV or news. Certainly don't read newspapers or anything like this. So yeah, I mean, I often go down these paths of like, well, most people seem to be doing this or that, and I always have to remind myself, like, well, fuck, that's just the tiny narrow aperture that I have onto the world. And it's one of the things that makes one of the stickers that I used to have, one of the truth tags was, in the age of information, ignorance is a choice, and of course my brain always goes to the counter examples. So, I really like that line. And anytime someone asks me how to do something, I'm like, fuck, you can Google it and you can find anything out. Like, people ask me, how do I do my animations? And like, well, I'm just all self-taught. Like literally anything you want to learn how to do, it's out there on YouTube for free. You can teach yourself if you have the motivation. But the flip side of that is, maybe this is not the age of information. Like it really seems to be, this is the age of misinformation. Like we're promised the sort of the utopian dream of like the information superhighway, and we're all going to be connected, and we're going to have access to all this information. But the problem is like there is all this information, but there's no quality control. So like it's sort of a Pareto distribution of like 99% of everything is shit, and it goes the same for what's on the internet. So and that's where I think a lot of the challenges in the world come today, because fundamentally we just don't live in the same world anymore. As it's like the average person you meet on the street, there's a good chance that you have zero overlap. Like if you imagine the Venn diagram of their media consumption, there might be zero overlap in that, and I really struggle with that, because we don't have a sort of a common baseline experience from which to start from. So, and sort of the dark house, that like the Weinstein brothers, and that they go on about this. They talk about the sort of the sense-making apparatus of the species has been just totally broken, and two sets of humanity, like let's take the example of the two political factions in America, the right and the left there, like they fundamentally don't agree on what's happening in reality. So, it's hashtag interesting times, so it seems to be getting hairy out there.
Yeah, I mean, I ultimately think it's a good thing, even though it's more cohesive to have like one narrative, in the Walter Cronkite days or whenever the fuck it was, where so like everybody thinks the same. But I think all of this bifurcation of attention and information and knowledge is ultimately good. We're just in the messy period, because it forces people to be responsible for their own perspective. Like you have to be the one that constructs your perspective based on your own, objective accumulation, collection of knowledge, and then how you interpret that to form, like we were saying a little bit earlier about like, how are you constructing or refining that orienting belief within you? That's what all this information is for, right? So you've got to take it all in, you've got to filter out the noise, and you've got to see where is the genuine truth and insight and wisdom that you're going to integrate into your own perspective and behavior. And I think even though right now it's super messy, all of this information coming from all different sources about every different fucking thing in the world is ultimately helpful for that process. But it does put a lot of the onus and impetus on the individual to take responsibility for that process and not outsource it like we have so many done for so many other things, a talking head on the TV at night to tell you what the fuck is going on in the world and what you should be thinking about it, right? Those days are rapidly coming to an end. But to your point about us, right where we are right now, like those people on the right and those people on the left believe what they believe equally powerful. It's like strongly. They're equally strongly held, and it's a really weird thing. Like, how could they have like 100% conviction that this is the truth, And those people can have 100% conviction that this is the truth, and they just cannot, see past each other. They cannot see eye to eye. Rather, they always see past each other. And I see it today. When I bump into people, in real life, I can just see like, oh, you're one of those people. Like you're on that side of the thing, and so everything you think is that side. And then I see another person like, oh, you're on that side of thing. Everything you think is on that side. So like, bringing Peterson back up, he talks about being ideologically possessed, and that's definitely a part of it, where you're just like, you've downloaded this perspective because it's easy and it's comfortable and it helps you orient your world without you having to do all the hard work to do it yourself. And so as a result of that, all of these things, all of your responses, or at least the vast majority of them, are automatic, and they're based in emotion, and they're not based on your own critical thought and integration. And that's why we get so much of the crazy shit we get, because people are just acting out these possessions. It's just they're an avatar for these ideas that are just flaring up all over the place, and they're not taking the time to put them to the test internally to make sure if they're actually worth holding.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's fucking scary, actually. I think regardless of who wins in the election in November in America, like the other side's not going to accept the outcome of it, and it's just going to get even heavier over there. And the one thing that I can really thank my education for, I had a physics teacher in high school, and he really drilled into us, he's my favorite teacher, he drilled into us the idea of thinking from first principles. And I was just always lazy, like all through primary school and up to like grade 10, like I just straight A student without ever having to study or try anything. And then in the last couple of years of high school, I just totally lost interest. And so it was great though, but he told me about first principles, and then if you understand first principles, you can kind of just work out everything from scratch anyway. And so I think it's a shame, but that's what's missing from these kind of political factions, I guess. And then the other thing about like you were saying, going back, and I think it all depends on your scope, like, how big of a picture you're looking at, and it's like the great pendulum swings of history, right? And we're in amongst it, so we can't see like the great arc of history. And it's that the oft quoted phrase of like hard times lead to strong men make good times, and good times make weak men, and the cycle sort of continues. And maybe another one of these cycles is where we go from sort of unified and aligned truth, or consensual sense making, like of the species, and we had that, and then we've moved into this totally like atomized, and everyone has a unique view, and you've got your social media feed and I've got mine. And then this group sort of reality has totally broken down. But then let's pull Bitcoin back into this, which is again, this sort of truth machine, which lets us realign back on one sort of ground truth that we can start building from again. And like, I wish it wasn't so. And that's where this sort of idea of being black-pilled comes into it. And there's some people that, they could call themselves accelerationists. We've just got to see this thing through to the end. I think, it's just got to get to the stage where things crash. And, to bring the drug use thing back into it again, like I got to a very dark place with amphetamines and that, and I was a fucking junkie, man. And it wasn't until I hit rock bottom that I could actually change, and I think that's the same on a grand scale with society, unfortunately. And I think, this thing like in the US with the left and the right, I think they're really going to pull themselves apart, and it's only after that we'll be able to rebuild something better in the wake of that. And, that's why I'm building on Bitcoin, because I want to be able to offer the people a solution when they come asking, and that's the only thing you can do. Like, you can be vocal and outspoken about this, and certainly in 2017, I was maybe obnoxious in my zealotry, and in people's faces. And it's probably another part of the reason that I turned to making these animations instead, because like after trying to sell people on the messages, sending them a wall of a text to try and convince them, and like it never works to change people's minds that way. So instead, I'm just gonna, like a Peterson quote, tend your own garden, clean your room, sort yourself out. I'm just gonna do my own thing and build the best life that I can for myself, and be consistent in their messaging. Like I post my animations to Facebook to all my normie friends, and now and then I'll have someone message me, and they're still banging on about that Bitcoin thing. And like you said, the number go up technology is going to get them in the end, if like all this talk of principles and doesn't. But when it keeps coming back up in their mind, and they see the bullshit that's going on in the real world, and I keep kind of telling them. I posted that picture of the Federal Reserve base 2 M2 money supply right now, and it's like 22% of the USD in circulation was created this year, and it's like these people don't know what that means for them, but you just keep plugging away. It's like water wears away the stone, one drip at a time, and then once the penny drops for them, they know they can come to you and actually ask to go down the rabbit hole, and you can lead them once the horses come to the water, I guess.
Yeah, and that's the thing that's so great that Bitcoin exists, is like before you had no life raft that was waiting there, because it's going to be there for you, right? But that wasn't there before, so it almost kind of it made the rationale behind even trying to understand what's wrong kind of a waste of time, because like, well, if you can't do anything about it, what's the point in trying to understand what's actually wrong? But now that there's actually something you can be done about it, I think that's putting even subconscious pressure on people to say, when they're in that, that dog in the burning house saying like, this is fine. When they realize that it's not fine, they're all the more, I think, incentivized now, or it makes more rational sense to actually look at an alternative if one actually exists. And so I think that's going to continue to happen, whether it's through NGU, whether it's through memes, whether it's through great articles and books and podcasts and stuff. But it almost seems like, Bitcoin is a North Star, but one that doesn't require like a similarity or a belief. It's because like all these other North Stars that we've used, to have this sense making, as you call it, to have this kind of cohesive, social perspective that kind of was the glue for everything to stay together, was always based on belief, right? And throughout most of human history, it was religion. But in some cases, it was philosophy. In some cases, it was politics. And it seems now we have this North Star that we can orient ourselves around and organize ourselves around, but it doesn't require everyone to believe the same thing.
Yeah.
But it still has the effect of having that it still has that cohesive effect, which is really, really interesting and really, really great. We don't all have to get along. We don't all have to think the same thing. We don't all have to believe in the same thing for us to cooperate and coordinate our behavior now, because we can rely on this thing to help us do that. And because so that, that may be a very unique and novel occurrence in human history. And I think a very, very positive one.
Yeah, I think Bitcoin is the solution to this Dunbar's problem again, and that's the thing. Like for people that don't know, it's the 150 people. That's how we're sort of hardwired. We can interact in social groups of 150 people, and beyond that, there's just not enough memory up there to slot people in. So the challenge is like, how do we scale these social institutions? And the solutions up to now have been like monarchies or aristocracies or corporations and other things, but there's always that social element in there, which is just so prone to politicization and then corruption, and so Satoshi came along and he's like given us this tool where we can remove the human element from this, and we can coordinate through something that is just sort of it's out there in code that anyone can check for themselves. And it just, like you said, it's like this thing that humanity can orbit around, I guess, like something central that is like a giver of objectivity, when humanity itself, like, we're all these individuals all doing our own thing. It reminds me a bit of what you were saying before. And I kind of disagreed a bit, because you were saying, and while I agree that it's necessarily so that whatever point in history that you choose, the people alive there, they were on the cusp. They were on the the leading edge of history. But I mean, it's still true that you just have to go back a few hundred years and someone, they were born and they, in their whole life, they never would have moved like 20 kilometers or 50 kilometers, if that, from where they were born, you know, and their grandfather, their father, you know, going back generations, they were, you know, they were farmers on this particular piece of land or whatever it was. And the big change, obviously, that's happened now is that it's just the rate of change that's happening. Like now we're seeing such massive changes like within our lifetime, you know, really great novels that give you this idea of the Neil Stephenson novels. Cryptonomicon should be kind of well known in Bitcoin circles. Neil Stephenson wrote Snow Crash. You know, that was the idea of the metaverse and stuff in there. Anyway, the prequels to Cryptonomicon are sort of set in the 1700s, and Stevenson has this real ability to help you see that like whatever the technology was in that time was that leading edge, you know, and, you know, at the time there, like they were just developing money. Like two of the characters in that book are Isaac Newton and Leibniz, you know, who invented the calculus together. And it's just like, you know, these guys were on the cutting edge. Like Isaac Newton went on to run the London Mint, and, you know, like he actually made the money back then. So they're fascinating books. And those books sort of deal with, you know, where money came from, you know, from being gold and the building of the first banks and stuff like that. So yeah, like I said, I think we're really I can't imagine what the world is going to be like when my daughter, you know, is sort of my age. But yeah.
Yeah, it's going to be, who knows, right? Who knows? Mm-hmm. Hopefully we make it through, and I think I'm more hopeful now than ever, of course. But it's going to get squirrely for sure. Mm. One of the things, we touched on this a little bit earlier, but I just wanted to get a little more of your thoughts on it. You know, you mentioned having, you know, issues with amphetamine in the past. You know, you were kind of psychedelic, you know, organic farmer, dreadlock sort of person. You've recently cut the dreadlocks off, and I think you said you know, since your daughter's been around, psychedelics haven't really been a big part of your thing. I asked before if Bitcoin had changed you, and I know for a lot of people, especially maybe people that came from that kind of world that we've just been describing, like, you know, for lack of a better term, the kind of the psychedelic crowd, that Bitcoin seems to have maybe brought them down to earth a little bit more, and kind of, this may not be the appropriate word, but hardened them a little bit, like made them, you know, the psychedelic people are often very, what's a nice way to put this? Soft is not the right word, but I guess I'm just wondering if have people in your life, you know, in looking at you over the last 3-4 years since you've been involved in Bitcoin, have they commented on any changes that may have taken place, you know, in who you are, how you act, even how you look?
It's probably just my personality in a greater sense, but like whatever sort of social group I found myself in, I would quickly get to the edge of that social group. So even while I was like the hippie dude, you know, I was still, you know, hardcore into like economics and, you know, like libertarian values and, you know, a free market capitalist. I was like an anarcho-capitalist sort of thing. You know, I think what you're probably getting at is like sort of like this airy-fairy sort of spiritual, like crystals and something all like that shit. And it's just not grounded in reality. But again, and I often, in conversations I have with people, I bring up Stefan Molyneux because I consider him a fallen hero. Like he's been kicked off YouTube and Twitter now, and so just like a shout out to him because he really put me on the path back in the mid 2000s and really helped me examine like my early childhood stuff, because I really do believe like a lot of that drug use and addiction, certainly it comes out of like early childhood trauma and stuff. So. And the last festival I went to, like, you know, I got on the acid and, you know, got on the dance floor, and I looked around and I just saw all these hurting children that were trying to find a way to, you know, heal, you know, whatever happened to them, you know, when they were little. So that's kind of a buzzkill in that sort of context. Yeah. So I think the people that have known me have always known that I've been, I guess, pretty intense about whatever I was into at the time. I was really into it. So I don't think for them, like I've always been into one crazy thing or another. Like Bitcoin's just the next thing, I guess. And so, yeah, I don't think they would have seen too much. But just for my own sense, it's like it's coming back to that thing greater than myself, some purpose. Like if this thing goes where we think and hope and have bet that it's going, like how awesome is that? I was there, at the beginning. It'll seem like the beginning if it's 2050 or something like that. And I can be creating some memes, like maybe they'll be hanging in museums or something like that in the far future. So like I guess as mortal beings, we're always trying to find some way to attain immortality in that sense. Yeah, I don't know. Maybe I'm reaching. I haven't really thought of it in this sense before, but yeah, it's just maybe it's one of those cliched things about it makes you more who you were anyway. I don't really know, man.
Right.
It's hard to know like who I would be now if it wasn't Bitcoin.
Yeah.
Like when it came into my life in 2017, we were still running that business, and my daughter had been born, and my partner was like, before that, it was really the parenting thing that I was like, and I still believe that, like 100%. We got to fix parenting before we can fix the world. Like all these damaged people that can't process reality properly, it's because something happened to them in their early years, which sort of damaged that part of them. So yeah, I think got to fix the parenting, fix the money, and then we're most of the way there, I believe.
Yeah, I think you probably hit the nail on the head when you said, I think Bitcoin pushes you to become more grounded in reality. And, because whatever your thing is, whether it's the psychedelic crowd or the political crowd, I mean, everyone is living in some form of their own echo chamber or delusion or, comfortable situation about what they think the world is and how it operates. Right. And I think, again, one of those aspects of truth is, as we've been talking about this whole time, is that it brings more reality to your perspective. And if something grounds you in reality, I mean, the reality of reality is that it can be very difficult. Reality is death. Reality is struggle. Reality is all of these things. And I think maybe that's part of the reason why, and I'll use just myself as the example. And I was never really like an airy-fairy sort of psychedelic person. Like I was always, I just didn't latch on to that. But in other areas of my life, I was probably a bit softer than I am now. And I think Bitcoin has had that effect of, again, shining that light of truth on everything, bringing my perspective or dissolving some of the delusion about my perspective and bringing me down to a more grounded view of reality. And then having that inspire in me, a voice that says, you need to become more conditioned for this reality. This new perspective or appreciation of reality, and reality can be harsh and reality can be difficult. So you need to adapt in different ways to, condition yourself better for that. And so, whether, that's manifested in a number of different ways, but I think it's just, and maybe that's part of the process that underpins a lot of the behavior change in this space as well. I think it's multifactorial, of course, but, I think that process is kind of leading people to, develop more, hardened is too broad of a term, but I think you and people will understand what I mean when I use it in this context, like a more hardened perspective and perhaps more refined behaviors or ways of coping with, being in the reality that we find ourselves in.
Yeah,
I'm not sure if that was clear, but.
Yeah, I think it gives you a reason to want to stick around longer, like it's the whole thing about time preference, right? And right. I definitely remember in my 20s, and like I literally used to say this, like I will live twice as hard and half as long, this idea of burning the candle at both ends, like shine twice as brightly but half as long, like all that kind of shit. And like I was going hard, and I like to flip it around now, and like now I intend to live forever. So far, so good, that old joke. And that's why I say, like the best thing for a young man is to have kids. And I think it's so tragic that it's been maligned so much in society now. And like I just think it's a shame for young women as well to be pushed into the workforce. You know, I don't want to go too far down that rabbit hole as well, but like I think,
big
yeah, I know, right? But I just think like the most important thing any person can do is bring, you know, healthy humans into the world, you know. So like this idea about, you know, working in some office job when you could be, you know, like what is more powerful, what is more empowering than forging the next generation of humans, you know? So, and like I said, like Bitcoin's sort of similar in the way, because here's something that's going to be forever, you know? And so like, I want to see how this thing turns out, you know? Are we going to make it? Like, are we right about this thing? I want to be around 50 years from now, or even longer, just to see how this thing turns out. So yeah, it's just, you know, and like I was there, I was that nihilist, you know. It's like the world's fucked, you know. Already in my 20s, like I could see how corrupt the systems that of power that were, and also just this sense that you couldn't really do anything about it. Like, you know, you can go hold up a sign and protest, but what are you going to do against the state, you know? And Bitcoin came along, and it's like, well, I can opt out, you know. Like, what better solution is there than that? It's totally peaceful. It, you know, as a libertarian, I try and uphold the non-aggression principle, and here's a way I can totally defang the state by separating money and state, and money is their central means of control. And yeah, I'm just trying to get as many people on board to see that as possible, so they're on the life raft with us.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more with everything you just said. And, you know, that gives me hope, because my experience, and I know so many people that I've spoken to, that was their experience too. They were just hopeless. They looked out on the world, they did a little digging to you know, enough to see like, holy shit, this thing's pretty fucked up, and I don't see any way that it's going to get turned around. And Bitcoin has provided that hope, and it's dramatically changed their perspective, one of nihilism and just thinking, well, like you said, I mean, might as well burn the candle at both ends, or might as well, you know, fill in the blank kind of destructive behavior, because this thing is doomed, to now thinking, no, there is a, you know, great and glorious future on the horizon. And we now have a powerful tool to bring it about, and to inhibit the other force that would seek to, you know, stop us from accessing that. And, that's what's so hopeful, is that because there's so much of that in the world today, which is unfortunate, of course, you know, and all these people, as a result of this fiat system and the system, the size and type of governance that we have all over the world. I mean, a lot of people feel that way, but if you and if I and a lot of the people that I've spoken to and that are listening to this can be so dramatically turned around from I love the term black pilled. I never heard it before, but, you know, from being, you know, profoundly black pilled to being profoundly orange pilled, and in a relatively short period of time, then that is an extremely hopeful circumstance for the world, you know. And you know, back in the day, you and I were probably both like, well, how do you fix the world? Well, we need to give everyone, you know, 5 to 10 grams of mushrooms and throw them in a dark room and see what comes out on the other side. But now, you know, greed and self-interest is going to bring this perspective to people, one at a time, but, you know, more and more all the time. And that's, you know, that's so exciting, as we keep saying. And if we're right at all about this, as you said a few minutes ago, what a fucking time to be here. You know, how could you stand to be anywhere else? Because if we're even partially right about this, we're at ground zero for one of the biggest, you know, revolutions or changes in human history. And, you know, you'd have to be almost, how could you not want to engage in it in some capacity, you know? So.
Yep. Well, the reason people don't is because they're too comfortable, you know. And I started this conversation, we were talking about my dad a fair bit, and, you know, like I said, he's just a regret machine now, and he's legitimate depressed, you know, and I think he's been for most of his life. And, you know, you try to help people who are in places like that. And I kind of told him at one stage, you know, after 10 years of trying to help him, and, you know, I said to him, you know, how bad does it have to get before you choose to change? Like, kind of putting the onus on him. Like, it's got to be your choice. You know, no one can help you with this thing. And that's sort of how it is for people now too. Like, people are just too comfortable. Like, it's too easy. Like, life is so glorious now. And, even going back, like those Neil Stevenson novels I mentioned, there's like the Louis XIV, King Louis XIV, who was called the Sun King. He was the king of France at that time, and he was the richest human being that had ever lived. And yet, he lived in Paris or Versailles or wherever he did, and he'd open his windows, and like the stench of the sewage and the shit running down the streets would have just knocked him over. And it also describes him. I think he had some hemorrhoids treated or something like that, and it goes into detail about like how anything like that was. And another example, I like anytime I go to the dentist, and they're like, well, this bit might hurt a little bit, and I'm like, just bring it on. We have, all the medical technology that we have today. Like, there's nothing you could possibly do to me in this chair now that will even, like I've read a description of what, dental work was like, even going back 100 years, so, and it's this thing about just appreciation. Like one of the other truth tags, and this one, it sold a bit better amongst the hippie airy fairy crew, but it was like just hashtag gratitude, and that was one of the things that pulled me out of my dark space when I was addicted. And I don't mind talking about it, like I've talked about it on podcasts before, but like I was a full methamphetamine junkie. That was all I did. That's after I got out of like social sort of party scene, and it was just something you're doing by yourself at home, and that was really, really bad. And I got really sick, and I got really depressed. And, one of the things that got me out of it was just to build up this sense of gratitude again, just gratitude for everything. And like, that helped when I was running this business as well, because I realized how hard it is to just consistently produce any product. And then when you walk into a supermarket and there's 10,000 products all for your gratification that you can spend a few dollars on and get whatever it is. And comes back to this thing about the iPencil essay I'm sure you know about, just like how hard it is to produce anything of value in this world. Like nothing is free. Again, that's my science fiction background, all the Robert Heinlein novels. There's no such thing as a free lunch, and it's just got to drill these basic principles of economics into people that people just don't get, like all these riots and stuff that are going on, like all the stimulus money that's happening. Like there's just such a massive disconnect in society about where things come from and like what actually produces value in the world. And people just imagine they can just keep printing money and it's actually producing value. And like this thing just mathematically can't continue forever. So, whether they can continue kicking the can down the road forever, for however many years, who knows, but they seem to be doing pretty well at that. But like I said, wearing the life raft and trying to get as many people on board as possible. So what else can you do?
I encountered that, and I totally agree. I mean, it is, hashtag gratitude is you're going to find that on the yoga page, Instagrams and all that kind of stuff, but it really is true. It's a powerful perspective, and it's one that should be integrated and used if you're seeking to live a happy, satisfied life, and I came to realize that a number of years ago as well. But one of the things I bump up against occasionally these days is when I'm decrying the current system and I'm, doing the Bitcoin pitch with people, it will seem like I'm not grateful for what we have now. And people will say like, dude, life is better than it's ever been. Like, well, what are you complaining so much for? Why are you trying to disrupt things so much? Why are you, et cetera, et cetera. And I think it's two reasons. One, the answer I give is one, from a first principles, from a principled point of view, I don't agree with a system that is predicated on unfairness and theft and lies. So I can't be for that. I have to be critical of that, even if I'm able to establish a quote unquote comfortable life for myself within it. And the second thing is I think it can be so much better. Yes, it's great now. Yes, medical technology is great. We're, life is more comfortable, let's say, than it's ever been. But first of all, is comfort the metric we want to be judging life on? To a degree, yes, and to a degree, no. But there is so much more available. There's so much possibility and potential, both for us as individuals and for us as, humanity. So why don't we strive for that? Like, we don't have to not be grateful for what we have in order to strive for something so much greater. So let's do that. Let's agree that it's wrong for us to be, stolen from. It's wrong for us to be lied to. It's wrong for us to be playing a game that's not, that everyone, the rules are not the same for everybody. Let's agree to those things. and then let's strive to pull that potential and that possibility forward. Why the hell not?
Well, they have done those studies, and comfort is objectively like a bad thing. They did the studies with, I think, rats or mice, and they gave them every conceivable comfort that they could have, and they just slowly turn crazy. So again, that's that cycle of history. Hard times, good men; good times, weak men. And I think we're just, in that final phase of things. Like things are too easy. Like too many people are just like too comfortable, and it kind of slowly turns people crazy. Like we need something to push against, we need to build something, and without purpose, like it's the idle hands are the devil's plaything or something like that. And just too many people like don't have anything to build on. It's another thing to come back to my dad as well. Like one thing that was hard for them, they sold their business. It might be 8 or 9 years ago now, and like I told him, like, look, you need something, you need a project. A man needs a project, something to be building on. Don't just retire and like sit around the house. Like he's always done stuff, and unfortunately he didn't, and he's just going crazy by himself in his house after that. So yeah, like people need a challenge, something to bring people together. And I was thinking when the virus came along, like at the beginning of this year, I was hoping this might be the thing that draws people together, like some communal, some communal challenge that can unite humanity. It's like that Independence Day, where the aliens come. Like maybe that's what it's going to take. Like 2020 is not over yet, so you might still have that in store for us. But like some huge challenge to come, which people can drop their petty differences and forget about this like left-right bullshit thing, and just have a common challenge to rise to. I guess
that didn't happen. It doesn't seem like it happened. Well, man, this has been a really fun conversation. Do you want to, and any last words? And if not, do you want to direct people to any of your destinations if they want to learn more or check out your work?
It's a lot of words already. Like, so just, I'm on Twitter. It's at StarFury Flames. And all my stuff is there. You've probably seen my animations around. If you do want to support me, there's a Tip and Me page as well. Throw some sats my way. I don't sell any of this art. So there's a whole NFT sort of rabbit hole we could go down as well. But, yeah, I'm not doing that. I'm just kind of just produce these because I love to do it anyway. But if you do want to throw me a tip, I do take that. So yeah, thanks, man.
Awesome, man. Well, look, I'm sure we'll talk again in the future. But until then, enjoy the new house. Keep putting out the great content, and keep doing your thing, man. It's great to see.
Thanks, brother.
All right, take care.
See you, mate.